Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Storm, and today we're going to learn what computer programming is. I'm sure some of you are maybe a little concerned about this class that you got put into. Maybe you're really excited about it. Some of you, maybe not so much. Well, in this video, I'm going to try to clear up some of the confusion around computer programming so that you can learn what you're going to be doing for the next year and kind of get a good idea of what computer programming is. So let's go ahead and move on. All right. Now, this is what most people think of when they think about computer programming. They think that, we're going to be just doing ones and zeros the whole time, binary and whatnot. And, this assumption comes from the idea that most people have learned that computers understand ones and zeros. That's it, right? And that assumption is correct, but not fully correct. It's not the whole story, right? It is true that computers understand ones and zeros. That's really all they understand. More to the point, really it's your processor that understands ones and zeros. Let's explain what that means. So think about a switch, right? So I have a switch here, and this switch is making connection with the point, with the area that it needs to make connection to, which means there's some electricity running through the switch. So that is on, right? And let's say we represent the on with a 1, right? So this is on, meaning electricity is passing through this switch currently. This switch down here is not making connection, so let's represent that as a 0. So now we have on and off, right? 1 and 0, which is why power symbols or power buttons usually have this symbol on it, which is a circle and a line through it. That represents on or off. Now, the mixture of on and off can create data, right? If let's say we're communicating via um, telegraph, right? And I'm sending you Morse code. If the signal is on, then that's 1. If the signal is off, that's 0. And the combination of the ones and zeros over time creates actual information that we can read. That's very basic information theory. And so that's an easy way to represent very complicated information with just one switch. Now, processors, or CPUs, have trillions of switches on the inside of them, right? And so ones and zeros, or on and off signals, come into the processor, and then through the magic of transistors, or switches, through that, out comes a different string of ons and offs, or ones and zeros. Now, this different string is new data that's been processed by the CPU. So data comes into the CPU, it gets processed and spit out. Now, luckily, we don't have to know any of that in order to be good programmers. But I just wanted to explain what the ones and zeros, the binary, is, because please don't think you're going to be having to understand what this actually means, right? Because that's not what programming is. This is what computer programming looks like. Now, I get it. It's probably still a little scary looking. You probably don't understand what any of this means. But if you look, you will notice that it's written in English, right? This is a lot better than ones and zeros, by the way, because we can actually understand what these words mean. Public, I've heard that word before. Most, I've heard that word before. Recent, file, get, file, list, if, loaded. These are all English words that we can understand. The problem is we don't understand them in this context, right? I know what public means, but what does it mean here? What does it actually do with this whole string of code? Now, that's what this class is going to be focused on. This class is focused on teaching you how to understand this and how to write this, more importantly, how to write it so that you can actually create applications that your computer can run. So, don't get confused by this. Don't try to decipher what this means yet, because again, this is something we're going to learn through the course of this class. So there are 4 steps that we need to go through in order to begin our programming journey, right? The first step is to pick a programming language. Now, programming languages are basically just like spoken languages or written languages. They all basically are symbols or sounds you make with your mouth that represent specific pieces of information. And if I'm speaking English, then I make different sounds. If I'm speaking Spanish, I make different sounds, but they can represent the same piece of information. That's kind of how programming languages work. They're all different, they look kind of the same, but they represent different pieces of information using different techniques. So we need to pick a programming language that works for us. Now, there are some good programming languages out there for beginners, there are some good ones for advanced people, and there are some that are kind of in the middle that cover everything. Some are better on Windows, some are better on Mac, some are better on or mobile devices, and there's some that are good at all of it. We'll go through that process together. I will actually help you pick the language we're going to use. I'm going to pick it for us. The second step is we need to learn the syntax. So once we pick a language, we need to figure out how we want to get our instructions to be understood by the computer, right? We need to know how to write out those instructions properly. So let's say let's imagine I have a robot, right? And I have a robot right in front of me. And right next to that robot, I have a 5-year-old kid, right? And that 5-year-old girl, she understands if I say, take one step forward, right? Because her and I are speaking the same language, and she understands the syntax, meaning she understands the words I'm telling her in this context, and she can use that to perform a specific action, right? So she takes one step forward. The robot may not understand my language or the syntax that I'm using to represent what I want him to do. So the robot may get confused and not know what to do, right? Computers are essentially just robots, right? We need to be able to communicate with them in their own way. And they need to understand the syntax. They might even understand the words we're saying, but they need to understand the syntax, how we're writing those words in order for their instructions to be clear. If a computer gets confused, it just stops. And that's not what we want. We want computers to not be confused, and we want to tell them what we want them to do in specific ways so that they know what they're supposed to be doing, right? So syntax is what we're going to be focusing on in this class. The third step is to install the SDK. We will talk about that later. And the fourth step is to install an IDE, which again, we'll talk about that later. So let's get into picking a programming languages. Here on the screen, I have 3 programming languages. These are 3 popular programming languages that are used all over the world for different applications. The first language there is called Python. Now, Python is widely considered to be the easiest programming language to learn. It's less cluttered. It's built for readability, meaning you should be able to read the language or read the code and understand what it's asking you to do. But even with Python, there's still a bit of a learning curve because we have to understand syntax and we have to understand the core mechanics of programming. We have to understand what variables are, or what a loop is, or what a conditional statement might be. So even with Python, there's still some learning. Now, I'm not actually going to teach you Python in this class, and there's a couple of reasons. One is because once you learn a programming language, no matter if it's easy or hard to learn, it's really easy to add new programming languages to your repertoire. Because once you understand the core mechanics of programming, all you have to do is learn the syntax for that next language. And so if we start with the easiest thing, it might be harder for you to pick up new languages because there are more complex methods you can use when you're writing some better programs. Also, I don't want to teach you Python because it's not a huge language used these days in most applications. It does do some web server stuff, and it does really well with very simple applications, but we're not going to use Python normally, usually in your working life. So I'm not going to teach you Python. The next language there is called JavaScript. Now, Java and JavaScript are completely different languages, right? So you'll hear those terms a lot, Java and JavaScript. Those are different languages. Java is a very popular programming language. It's probably the most popular programming language. JavaScript, on the other hand, is used mainly for web development. And I'm not going to teach you JavaScript in this class because I have an entire class on JavaScript in my Web Development Fundamentals 2 class. That class mainly focuses on JavaScript. And then we also do JavaScript in my HTML5 application development class. So if you want to learn JavaScript, take one of those 2 classes. And the final language I have on here is C++. Now, C++ is dear to my heart because it's the first programming language I ever learned. I love C++. It's my favorite. Well, uh, not anymore, but it used to be. Um, and I think it's really easy. But after I learned it, I got to talking to some people and they told me, oh, C++ is the hardest language to learn for a beginner. And I realized that because I didn't know that and because I struggled through it and I actually learned this language, it's now easy for me to pick up any programming language whatsoever. And so I'm not going to teach you C++ because there's an even better language that we're going to learn. And that language is called C sharp. Okay, C sharp is what this language is right here. This is what C sharp looks like. Now, once we focus on C sharp as our main language we're going to learn in this class, and you'll see the benefits to C sharp later as we get into Unity video game development in the second half of the course. Also, because we're in a Windows environment, C sharp is really great for developing Windows applications. So you'll see why it's a benefit to learn C sharp first. But the first half of the course is going to be learning the syntax, learning what this stuff means and that stuff right there and this and all that. What does a double mean? What does a while mean? What does writeline, console.writeline mean? What does any of this stuff mean at all, right? So that is going to be the focus of the first half of this course. So the first two steps are going to be completed. Now we need to get into the SDK and the IDE. So what do these things mean? Well, first, the SDK is a software development kit. It's basically a set of instructions that teach your computer how the syntax of the language that you're going to be using actually works. For every language that you want to program, you need to install the SDK for that language on your computer. Now, we're going to do that in the next video, so don't get confused. Don't think, oh, I don't know how to do any of that. I'm going to teach you how to do that in the next video. The IDE is called, or the IDE is an integrated development environment. And what that means is essentially IDEs are applications that allow us to write code, and it gives us tons of benefits. For example, um, we could write anything we want, any code we want. We can open up Notepad and we can write the code in Notepad as long as we had the SDK installed for that language. But it's not going to help us figure out where our errors are. It's not going to help us compile the program so that it can be run. It's not going to help us, figure out what we're missing, things like that. IDEs, they color code your lines of code that you're writing. They color code keywords, variables. They help us find errors in our code. And there are debuggers which will go through your entire code and find all of the errors that you have and list them out so you can fix them. IDEs also have compilers. What compilers do is they take that programming language code that you've written out in English and in the right syntax, and they mush it together and they convert it into the ones and zeros your processor can understand. And it creates an application that when you run that application can actually be utilized by your computer. So when we make video games, we need to compile the application so that it will actually run. And IDEs have compilers there. So what's the point of all this, right? Why do we want to build applications? Why do we want to learn how to program? Well, everything that runs on your computer was built using computer programming. Everything from video games that you play to, you know, word processing applications you use to write papers, or Photoshop when you're trying to, manipulate images, or, even Netflix, even things that you do online, applications that you use online. These are all developed using computer programming. And if you want to develop applications, which, by the way, you probably should because it's a huge market and it's a great job. If you want to develop applications, make video games, make the next Instagram or Snapchat or whatever it is that you want to do, You need to learn programming. Programming is the core mechanic for creating these applications. Now, there's a lot that goes into it. There's design and user interface theory and all kinds of stuff. But you need a programmer to develop these applications. So, to sum it up, computer programming is essentially just writing instructions to the computer in a way that it can understand. And in order to be effective programmers, we need to learn that language, learn the syntax of that language, and use special software in order to write that code and convert it into something the computer can understand. And if we write our instructions properly, the computer will do what we want it to do. The challenge in programming is figuring out how to get the computer to do what you want it to do. And that's what we're going to focus on in this class. It may be a bit scary right now, and I get it. I understand it's always hard trying something new, but I guarantee if you stick with it and you really give it a good shot, you're going to be surprised at how much you learn in such a little amount of time, such a short amount of time. And you're going to be kind of blown away that this new skill is becoming a huge part of your life. When I learned how to program, uh, it was a huge change for me. I learned that there was this new world out there that I wasn't a part of, and now I can do anything. I can make any application that I want, and it's just by learning these core mechanics. Now, programming is a stress reliever for me. When I get a little bit flustered or I have some time to kill and I want to relax, I'll sit down and write some programs. I'll build a video game or I'll write some code to try to solve a problem. I love it. It's great. And hopefully you'll get into it and you'll get excited about it as well. All right. Well, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to let you get on with the class. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to install your IDE that we're going to use for this class and how to install the SDK that you're going to use for C Sharp. And then after that, we're going to start actually writing some programs. So I'm excited to get started. I hope you are too. I will see you in the next video.